Good morning, afternoon, evening, whenever and wherever you are, my friends. My name's Alex, and I'm here today to teach you about local, object, scene, and global variables, as well as where to find those in GDevelop and where to use them and when not to use them. All right, let's get started. Okay, so I am in a untitled game scene. This is the default game scene that you get when you create a blank project in GDevelop. Now, I do have other things stowed away in here, so ignore those, but yours will look just kind of blank like this with no objects and nothing else, no extensions in here. Before I get into exactly where to use all of these variables, there's one important factor that you kind of need to know in GDevelop, and it's kind of a side note, and I'll get more into this later on into another tutorial, but I want to introduce this to you now. A game scene or the untitled game scene is a combination of an external event and a external layout combined into one. An external event sheet is just a standalone event that is blank that you can tie into other game scenes, allowing you to run code that is like modulated or fragmented from your main code, calling it into your game scene at any point of time. This technically, this area here is actually a layout. So imagine for a moment that this is a layout scene, and then this would be or like external layout, external event. Now a game scene is both of those things combined into one, and they're standalone. Uh, let's say standalone compartmentalized areas of your game. Now that might be a little confusing. What I mean to say here is that whatever is inside of these game scenes, this game scene, unless it's linked to another one via an external layout or an external event, they do not share objects or other properties amongst them. And that'll be important when we talk about scene variables. Okay, so now going into the untitled scene events, I want to talk to you first about the first variable type, which is a local variable type. The scope of a local variable type is bound to the event that it's assigned to. You can add a local variable by right clicking, going to add, and then add a local variable. You can also press Shift L if you like. Now, a local variable is only available inside of the event tree that it's housed under. So if I called this position X maybe and gave it a number and added another one called position Y or POSY and left them blank, we can now see that we've declared them. Now this would be more in line with traditional programming. Whenever you declare a variable inside of a function, this is where you would do that, and that's a local variable. Now, I cannot access this variable outside of the tree that we design here. If I make another one of these, I can't target. Let's go variable name. You'll see here, if I go, let me remove these because these are scene variables because these are from a different tutorial. So let me just show you that when I go into here, we can see that we only have global variables accessible, which are these little global buttons, but none of the position X and position Y's. Now, if I go into here, and let's delete this one and go up a couple levels and go to an action over here, like variable, we're going to type variable, and now we can see that there's a local variable here that we can access. Awesome. Okay. So only inside of this is where we're able to adjust those. Now, we can actually target a different variable outside of its scope, like a scene variable or a global variable or even an object variable, and change those variables inside of here. So we're going to leave these positions here, and we're going to go back to our game scene, and we're going to talk about scene variables. A scene variable is anything that is bound to this game scene. So if you don't want it to be a local variable, something that's only within this one little script, and you need something a little bit more broader scoped that can be accessed by anything inside of that game scene or inside of the scene events, you would then use a scene variable. And you can right click on the screen and go to scene properties, or simply go up here to the top right, click on the open settings, go down to edit scene variables, and now we have a scene variable. Let me show you how this works. we're going to go in here and we're going to name this scene var1. And we're going to add another one. So scene variable 1, scene var2, and we're going to hit apply. Now, if we go back into here and we add another condition underneath the local variable, we can then add an action type variable, click on it, and now we can see not only the local variables, but also the scene variables. If you look at the icons here, I know they're kind of small, but you'll see that this one's kind of like the 2 lines. This one looks like a kind of like a movie ticket, and then, or like a cinema reel, and then there's the global symbol. And you can kind of see those up top here. If I close this down, you can see local, scene, and then global. You'll see the icons here. So that's kind of a good way for you to visualize where the scope is on those. So because a scene variable can be used in any location here within the game scene, if we open up our project manager and go into our external events, we're going to add a new one. We're going to leave it as an untitled event. We don't need to do anything there. We're going to go in and click it once, and it asks you which scene would you like it to be included in. Now, there's a few other ways to do this, but once you connect it to this game scene, it'll have accessibility to all of the scene objects when you tie it into a scene event. So when we click on the scene, it asks you what external event you want to link, or in order to use the external event, we need to link it to an event that already exists. So we're going to say our untitled scene, which is this one. Hit choose. And now, as you'll see, if I go into here and type variable, we can see that we can only access our global variables and the scene variables that we made to the attached game scene. If I was to create a new game scene, let's say that this is the menu game scene. So we're going to change all of this. We're going to call this game. And it closes if you change its name. So we're going to open up game scene, and game scene's now what holds all of our current scripts. And the menu scene is, as you see here, no scene objects, no events. And if I go in here and go to add a condition, we'll type variable again, you'll see that I can only access the global variables. And that's because the scene variables are tied into the individual scenes that they're associated with. Now, to go one step further into this and make it a little bit more complicated, sorry everybody in advance, when we go to add an object, in GDevelop, objects are self-governed. And I'll explain what that means here. As we add, we're going to call this, we'll call this player for now. The player object we have, we're going to not add a sprite or anything currently, because we're just going to make an empty object. When we go to the variable of this object, we can add whatever we'd like. Now, this is when an object is self-governed in GDevelop. What that means is, because every time we add an object to a game scene, it counts as an instance of an object, they have their own stats that can be modified independently per object. Let me show you. Let's say that this is a type. Maybe we're going to make an enemy rather than a player, and we need a type of enemy. Well, let's call this enemy, let's change it to a text, and we're going to just call this initialize for now. So the enemy is blank, for example. Now, if we were to add this player to our game scene, it becomes an instance of the player. And if we click on it, we can see over here that it's an instance. Now, a object variable has an instance variable, and this one is initialize. If I was to add another player or enemy, and I was to change the object variable here, let's call this Goblin. Well, now, this one's called Goblin, and this one's initialized. This is really important as we get later on into GDevelop to understand how we control enemies and other states. But what this shows you is that objects should be self-governed. They should hold all of the data that's relevant to them, because the way that GDevelop works, if I go to preview here, and we're going to launch preview and debugger, when the game launches, I'm going to go ahead and minimize it. We're going to press refresh over here. I can go to scenes once the game actually loads. Let me wait for it to load all the way. There we go. I can go into global variables, so we can see the globals that we have. And then now when I go into scene and we go down to player, we can see that we have two objects, number 1 and number 2. And we can see their individual stats. So rather than checking for each instance of an object, we can simply say when the player equals goblin, change the skin to a goblin skin or something like that. So now that we understand how instance variables work, I've already kind of shown you a few of these, but we're going to go back to the game scene, go to our project manager, and go to a global variable. As you've seen here, I have a string, a number, and a boolean that are at a global level. And multiple times throughout this video, you've seen those variables show up. A global variable is accessible in scope in every aspect of your game. So global variables should be used for things that are reoccurring in your game as often as possible. And personally, I also use global variables for anything that I'm going to be saving. So if you like to save your game state and make a save and load system, eventually the data and information that you'd like to save needs to be transferred into a global variable to be saved into JSON so that the next time that the player comes to play, they can automatically load those values in. Now, I'll be covering saving and loading in a different tutorial, but it's important that you understand the scope of these things. So global variables could be used to store player data, and I'm going to show you a variable type that we haven't talked about yet in our brief tutorials, and that's a structure. Structures can add other variables underneath them, and we can give them titles. It's different than an array because arrays count from 0, 1, 2, and 3, but we can actually label these. So if we were to call this, say, player data, we could then name this one health, and we'll say that the player has 10 health. We'll add another variable, make sure it's underneath the player data, and we could say speed, maybe, and we'll set that to 100. Now, whenever we go to access one of our events, if we were to go into an action and type variable, change a variable type, we can now see that there's a structure of player data, and now we can see player data.health, player data.speed. This works very similar to object variables. And if I was to go in, this works much the same as object variables. And if we were to click on an action and click on our player type variable, we would then see that there's a type as we wrote earlier. And now this one we could change into bug, maybe. Let's say, because we're going to stick to that whole enemy for the player. So here we would be changing the variable type of the player into a bug. Now, if I was to click on this again and type variable on the in the actions list, we can now target different things like player data.health. And we can target object variables or any other variable type inside of the value expression area of GDevelop. If we were to type player, we'll see that player pops up. Now player dot allows us to connect to other variables inside of an object, as we can see right here. You see the little cube? That's an object. Object, text, type. So now the player's health data is equal to the player type. Now this is a number, and that doesn't really work in this case, but I wanted to show you that there are expressions that you may not see in GDevelop naturally through the actions and conditions list. You kind of need to know how these things work to be able to access them. So that was local, object, scene, and global variables. Hopefully you found this tutorial helpful. I apologize for it being a little bit longer. Well, that's all I have for you. So until next time, remember, happy game making, and I'll see you in the next video.